When I was first given unsupervised access to the internet, it felt as though I had taken the red pill from the Matrix, except rather than being able to learn and perform complex martial arts moves to a satisfactory standard almost instantaneously, I was allegedly able to meet hot singles in my local area, which, as an 11-year-old boy, was almost as impressive as being proficient in Kung Fu. And while the rapid acceleration of technological advancement has had its fair share of problems, it was also very formative for me and helped to shape a lot of the interests that I have today, such as horror and gaming. So today we're going to look at Lorelai, the bee's knees, the cherry on top, the sisters Mister, the lion's hymen, the llama's Parma violets. But is it any good? Let's find out. The first thing I noticed about Lorelai was how beautifully it presents itself. The art style is definitely evocative of Mikulski's previous work, however, unlike the Cat Lady in Downfall, Lorelai is filled with vibrant colours left, right and centre, and it really draws you into the game's environments, and actually makes a lot of the scenes more impactful. Take this scene for example, the washed out white backgrounds contrast with the iridescence of the game's previous environments to make the player feel disconnected and out of place. It sets the player on edge and highlights the violent imagery that's presented to the player. It's both charming and optimistic, yet gruesome and oppressive at the same time, a bit like a certain North Korean dictator, though I will say it does detract from the horror element somewhat when everything looks so damn cozy.
Oh God, oh Jesus, what is this?
Okay, maybe not everything. The abundance of colour is not the only new graphical addition either. Lorelai was built in Unity, which expanded the scope of the game quite heavily, allowing Mikulski to experiment with 3D elements, though, functionally speaking, the game is still very much 2D. It's a bit of an amalgamation of the two, and while it's interesting to see the creator trying out new things, many of the 3D elements feel like they're straight out of a dated tech demo. There are places where it works, but more often than not, I'd say the 3D is quite jarring and detracts little from the otherwise fantastic art style. It isn't terrible though, and it's encouraging to see an indie dev pushing boundaries even if every shot doesn't quite land on target. Another element that really strengthens the aesthetic of the game is the alluring soundtrack, which, composed by Rem's brother Mikimik, sorry if I butchered your name, I love your music, blends hauntingly soft piano pieces, Yamaoka-esque ambient tracks and experimental synthesized songs to thicken the atmosphere and really drench the game in mood. The beauty of this game's ambience really cannot be understated, and it is in no small part due to the varied but consistent soundscape. The same, unfortunately, can't quite be said for the voice acting, which is both very good
all my friends from school just moved on,
and pretty bad at times.
You're gonna fail. You're gonna fail 10 times, 100 times, maybe even 1,000 times.
This is an issue I've had with the previous games in the series as well. Lorelai's voice actor does an incredible job, and actually, the majority of the voices are genuinely well done. However, there are some very janky moments sprinkled in, though I think the majority of these moments are mainly due to the somewhat inconsistent quality of the writing in this game. Much of the dialogue feels unnatural and at times a bit cringeworthy. I think this is partially due to the way many characters are written with exaggerated Britishness, which feels quite forced a lot of the time but does create some genuinely funny moments as well.
Now, that's very rude, sweetheart.
hopefully we don't have to drag her out of bed.
Richard! Where are you?
There are also quite a lot of references to gaming culture thrown in there, and it starts to feel a little bit pandery, especially when coupled with the unnaturally long pauses between sentences. Speaking of long pauses, the load times are pretty long between screens. In fact, one room transition in particular caused my game to crash a few times, though I'm sure this will be patched out in the future. There are also a few guest cameos offering their vocal talents to the game. I won't spoil any, but it was cool to see. Or hear, I suppose. The game opens with Lorelai returning home from work to her dysfunctional family. Her stepfather acts abusively towards her, her neglectful mother, and her baby sister, and I feel like this is a good time to say that, like the previous games in the trilogy, Lorelai tackles some very heavy subject matter that hits incredibly hard, and as a result feels very human despite the fact that the game has numerous supernatural elements to it. Without wishing to spoil too much of the story, there are quite a few twists and turns that keep the story interesting, and the relatable elements resonate in a poignant way. I do feel, however, like there are some pretty glaring pacing issues, and the story itself is a little bit misguided. A few segments are overly drawn out and honestly quite boring, and at least one of these moments, a full chapter of the game, could have been cut entirely, and I don't feel as though the game would have been any worse off without it. It's frustrating because Michalski can tell very emotionally mature stories very well. He's proved it with The Cat Lady, even if that game did have a few issues overall, but it did succeed in painting an extremely sad and well-executed picture. The same can be said for Downfall, but I feel like Lorelai is quite unbalanced and misses the mark a little bit. It pulls many different themes and aspects together but bites off more than it can chew, and it genuinely feels quite messy. Characters are introduced, barely utilised, and then never really seen or heard from again. You could argue that this feeds into the theme of isolation and mirrors the fact that the people in Lorelai's life have moved on and left her trapped in a situation she doesn't like. But if it's intentional, it doesn't really work. There is also one section of the game that really disappointed me, and it came so close to being a fantastic chapter. I won't spoil it, but essentially you're told you have to do a specific bad thing to a stranger in order to prevent another bad thing from happening to the people you love. This ethical dilemma is really quite compelling, and it would have made for interesting gameplay and replayability. Unfortunately, there are literally no stakes, and if you do not do the bad thing, nothing actually happens. The promise and subsequential lack of conflict is a cop-out and left me feeling a little bit cheated. Despite my qualms with the story, there are a lot of genuinely touching moments and many disturbing scenes that tastefully succeed in evoking emotion. It's all handled maturely and works. It's just a shame that more focus wasn't given to certain aspects. There is definitely more quantity than quality when it comes to subplots and themes, and it leaves the game's story feeling much weaker than the previous three in the series. It's almost as if Rem wanted to explore a wide array of different concepts, but in doing so could not refine any of them fully. In terms of gameplay, Lorelai will feel very similar to those who have played Michalski's other games. It's mainly a blend of puzzle solving, exploration, and dialogue, and it's done fairly well. The addition of a run button is very welcome, and the animations look great. The puzzles themselves are pretty simple, a few of which are incredibly dull and don't really do much for the story, an example being finding some batteries in a drawer for your headphones. It can feel a bit like a chore sometimes, but the charm of the game overshadows the mundanity of some of its sequences. There's also one puzzle in particular that really made no sense to me whatsoever. There's a great abstract environment involved that is visually intriguing, but the puzzle is bizarre. It's very straightforward and doesn't really take any thought. It's just very random. Maybe I'm not smart enough to comprehend it, but I can't really tell what it symbolises, and if it doesn't symbolise anything, then I don't know what its purpose is. It almost feels like it's being surreal for the sake of being surreal. It does look fantastic though, I'll give it that. It's certainly one of the more memorable screens in the game, even if its inclusion doesn't feel at all meaningful. There are some good puzzles too, despite the fact that they're all quite basic, and there are also some interesting gameplay elements thrown in there as well, such as in Chapter 5, but they aren't really explored deeply enough to reach their true potential. An example of this is the strange karma system in the game that feels very threadbare and inconsequential. Again, this is an example of Michalski's ambition overriding consistency, and it would have been nice to see these concepts fleshed out. In terms of length, the game itself only took me around 5 hours to finish, and I didn't rush my playthrough at all. For me, this isn't an issue. I actually quite like short games. The Resident Evil 2 remake, which is a AAA title, only took me around 7 hours on my first playthrough, and I consider it to be one of the best games I've played for many years. But I know that some people may not be happy with paying £11 for a 5-hour game, and I think that's fair enough. I'd just like to take a moment to say I don't enjoy speaking negatively about things, and what Michalski has achieved is nothing short of incredible. I certainly couldn't make a game on my own, but I feel it would be dishonest of me to shower this game with praise and turn a blind eye to its drawbacks just because I admire Michalski. Judging by the Steam reviews, I would say I'm in the minority here, but overall I have to say I was quite disappointed with Lorelai. I went into the game with high hopes that initially seemed to be being fulfilled, but unfortunately the game quickly fizzled out into mediocrity. It genuinely breaks my heart to say that, and I wanted so badly to love this game. To fans of Michalski's previous work, I would still recommend a playthrough, but to anyone else I would suggest they play Downfall or The Cat Lady first, and then pick up Lorelai if they wanted to see more. The game is beautiful, yes, but the window dressing can't hide the fragmented and messily executed story that lingers on the other side of the glass. I will continue to support Harvester Games in their future endeavours, and don't want to take anything away from Rem's creativity, ambition and imagination. I just hope that the next game will be a little more consistent. There are some truly great elements in Lorelai, they just aren't given enough time to shine. It's easy to see the potential here, and the game is not bad, it just isn't up to Mikalski's previous standards. If you're watching this Rem, which you probably aren't, please continue to make things. You have a brilliant mind and a promising future. My intention is not to bring anyone down, I just feel as though constructive criticism is important, and I feel my points are genuine and fair. Thank you for watching, have a wonderful day, and consider subscribing if you liked the video. Much love.